Top 3 marriage killers you had so far ignored it. Hi friends, welcome to Marriage Realities, a comprehensive relationship channel. Today's video is all about the 3 qualities that you ignorantly display towards your spouse without knowing that it could wreck your marriage. When in love, you assume that your life with your spouse would always be happy and fulfilled. After all, you had married the person you ardently loved. What could go wrong with my marriage? You're smug about your relationship, aren't you? You have many dreams about your relationship being problem-free and stress-free. You're stunned when your relationship with your spouse undergoes drastic changes after a few years of marriage. The problem-free marriage you dreamed of does not happen. On the contrary, relationship problems and issues which you never thought would come between you become a daily happening. You're shocked when boredom creeps into your relationship. You're also taken aback when your marriage struggles to find its foothold. And you're all at sea, not knowing how to make your relationship work. You wonder about what mistakes you could be committing, that your relationship with your spouse is becoming too tedious for your liking. You're emotionally upset when your dreams about a perfect marriage is shattered. Why does your marriage struggle to survive after a few years of your relationship? It is because you think that your marriage will work on its own. So, in your smugness, you overlook certain cancer-like aspects eating into your relationship. There are many factors that destroy your relationship without you realizing it. But there are 3 most lethal qualities that you display in your marriage will literally pulverize your relationship with your spouse. It is sad that you do not give importance to nip these negative qualities from your married life in its beginning stage itself. You coolly overlook these highly damaging qualities as not important. But you realize its negative impact only after it erodes the happiness and contentment of your married life. Your relationship with your spouse will always be an emotional affair. When emotions are ignored and disregarded, it makes damaging inroads into your married life. And when you let these negative qualities in your relationship thrive, it could end your marriage. Shall we now look at the 3 highly damaging qualities which destroys the element of happiness in your married life? The number 1 highly damaging quality of your married life is indifference. In the initial stages of your marriage, you pay attention to the emotional needs of your spouse in a caring way. You show great interest in your spouse. Both spend quality time together. You make each other feel loved and cared. You have many things to talk about. The physical intimacy between both is at its peak. But after the newness of your marriage wears off, you lose interest in your spouse and gradually drift away from him or her. When you're indifferent towards your work, you lose interest in giving your best to your profession. When you become indifferent about your looks, you just let go your appearance. Can you see how much you need interest in your day-to-day life also? Your relationship also needs your interest. Your spouse also needs your interest. When you're not interested in your spouse, you become indifferent towards his or her emotional feelings. When indifference creeps into your marriage, everything about your relationship becomes tedious and tiresome. When you're indifferent towards your spouse, you do not give emotional support to him or her. You hardly notice the presence of your spouse. There is absolutely no love in your eyes when you look at your spouse. Your spouse might as well be a stranger for all the attention you give him or her. You live in your own world of aloofness and your spouse lives in his or her own world of remoteness. Since you have lost all interest in your spouse, your relationship drifts along uninterestingly and boringly. You're together in the same house physically, but you're 2 apart from each other mentally. When you become indifferent in your marriage, you do not notice and appreciate your spouse. And your marriage meanders along drearily with nothing exciting in it for you. Number 2 most lethal quality which destroys your marriage is lack of communication. Most of you stop communicating with your spouse after a few years of marriage. You had so much to talk with your spouse in the initial stages of your marriage. You talked about everything under the sky with your spouse. Both were humorous. You laughed together. You could not have enough of each other. Everything changes after a few years of marriage. You become non-communicative towards your spouse. Why does the sudden non-communicative changeover in your interaction with your spouse happen? After marriage, you are surrounded by various commitments and responsibilities, and you have many issues towards which You and your spouse never see eye to eye, and you invariably talk with your spouse only about family issues, money, repayments, mortgage, or savings. These are all argumentative topics, nothing to feel excited about. Slowly but surely, your communication with your spouse loses being interesting to you. You find your mobile phones or your TV far more interesting than your spouse. You spend more time in social media than with your spouse. You spend more time watching movies than be with your spouse. You refuse to answer when your spouse comes to you with family problems. There is no more teasing between you. You no longer display a love towards your spouse. There are no more gentle physical gestures to make the love for your spouse pronounced and distinct. You do not utter pacifying words when your spouse is stressed and tensed. When there is no interaction between you, you do not share your feelings with your spouse. Unshared feelings, unsaid apology, unwarranted silence all destroy a marriage. Number 3 most lethal quality destroying a married life is taking your spouse for granted. When you take your spouse for granted, you overlook many of his or her finer qualities. You do not appreciate your spouse for his or her relentless contribution towards the family. It is because you feel your spouse is only doing his or her duties. You do not appreciate the looks of your spouse. You treat your wife as an unpaid maid you are married to look after you and your children. You treat your husband as an ATM card to fulfill all your womanly cravings. When you are not appreciative towards your spouse, he or she feels used by you. When you take your spouse for granted, you become unsupportive. You are also not protective towards your spouse. You feel that it is the duty of your wife to be responsible and committed without understanding that you two should be the same. This taking for granted attitude makes your relationship with your spouse heated and hostile. Do you know the taking for granted attitude of yours makes your spouse resent you? In retaliation to your insensitive attitude, your spouse too does not cater to your emotional needs. This tit-for-tat behavior creates a huge rift between you. Do not allow your marriage slip into mediocrity by practicing these lethal qualities. Understand the simple fact that you feel happy and fulfilled only when you have excellent rapport with your spouse. So, avoid being indifferent towards your spouse. Never stop communicating with your spouse. Never take your spouse for granted. Your life will travel along with your spouse until the day you live. So, treat your spouse as your life partner and not as your everlasting enemy. Embed the niceties your marriage should have and avoid the negativities your relationship should not have. Did this video make you understand how you are making your married life agonizing and stressful by being ignorant about the lethal qualities your relationship does not need? Marriage Realities will have many such relationship eye-openers. Subscribe to my channel to understand your marriage in a new light. Press the bell icon for updates about my latest relationship videos. Make love forever and to death do us part your relationship goal.